Ladies and gentlemen, after having finally finished Death's Door, I wanted to kind of collect my thoughts and opinions in a review of the game overall. It took about 8 hours to finish the game. And honestly, this game was incredibly charming. If you haven't seen it yet, it's recently released. I think a couple weeks ago is when it came out. It's published by Devolver, but it is developed by a two-man team with Acid Nerve. They're the ones that did Titan Souls. But if you look at the credits, they ended up outsourcing a lot of the art content, which, you know, it makes sense. It is kind of truly inspiring how much work you can get done from an artistic standpoint through outsourcing, right? So by just getting people outside your team involved in the development. Having not been part of the development, I have no idea what percentage of it was done by in-house versus outsourcing. And obviously there's a lot of cohesiveness to it, which you can't really get without someone in-house driving the creative and the development. So obviously the people that worked on the team in core must have worked on all the mechanics and the story and all that kind of stuff. And then they just needed help with effects and animations and models and then publishing and marketing art and whatever else, right? But the core team was very small. So you kind of look at this as a cheaper indie title developed by a very small team with passion. And honestly, I think it's worth every dollar that you spend on it. I think it's about $20 US full price. And you get about 8 hours, 7-8 hours out of it. And there's actually a lot more. So when I finished the game, there's like a good bit of end game content, maybe another 2 hours or something like that, depending on how much you want to get out of it. And of course, you can play through it again with a different weapon type. So what is Death's Door? It is a top-down action RPG. You play that kind of arcade style. I played it with a controller, which felt really good. And then you'll end up collecting just a handful of weapons. You have a sword. You can use twin daggers. There's a lightning hammer. There's a great sword you can pick up. And then you can run with a bow, and then you get special powers for reasons in the story that I won't divulge here. And the gameplay I'm going to put behind you is just the opening, minutes of the game. It's not going to be anything end game. If you want to get that, buy the game and play it. I'm not going to give you any spoilers here, but I'll talk about my experience with the game. One thing I loved about Death's Door is the gameplay feel was very polished. Just rolling, moving, swinging, shooting, getting hit by things, looking at animations of the enemies. All of it was very clean. There wasn't really anything that stuck out. It kind of had that Dead Cells vibe where you can tell that someone or multiple people sat down and tried to make sure that everything felt really good and matched up well, that animation timings were good, the VFX landed where they should have, and everything just kind of comes together. So I think the gameplay feel overall is very good, and it's something that you should just kind of get into and enjoy, and it won't detract from your experience at all. Now, the basic story of the game is you are a Reaper. You're a Grim Reaper, a Soul Reaper. The crows handle this, and you're given a job to go reap a soul. Something bad happens, and then you realize that the world isn't really what you seem. So it's kind of that there's a lot of tropes being leaned on here, but in a very charming way. You have animals that are playing different characters. Obviously, your main character is a crow. And then as the story develops over time, it's not something that they stick in your face too aggressively, but it does fit the world, and there's some shocking elements to it. And I'd say overall, as an IP, everything is quite cohesive, right? You see there's a door opening, which is how the Reapers go into the world to reap the souls they reap. And then things happen. And then you get you get these little moments here where there's a lot of expression from the characters and a lot of personality that comes out of it. And it's tough to do this with only a few lines and some basic presentation. So they did some good stuff with the camera and with the timing of things to really bring out the personality of the characters. And I thoroughly enjoyed how the characters fit into the world overall. There is progression in the game. You can go back to a shop and you can expand on melee, you can expand on range, you can expand on HP. There's some categories you can put into. It's a very basic progression system. And it's honestly something that I didn't even have enough in-game currency to really make a lot of choices with it. I kind of committed to a melee build and that was it. And maybe that's fine for what it is. It wasn't anything fancy. And I can say it's probably one of the weaker areas of the game is the fact that you didn't really get to overly specialize your character. It's not a long game, so you don't always expect that from like the 8-hour games to be able to just dive right into your character and really flesh them out. It does allow for replayability, so you know, if I went melee this time, if I ever want to play the game again, I can do a ranged build or some mixture along those lines. And there's a lot of cool things to find in the environment that boost up your HP or your mana. The mana system was very basic, and honestly, again, just like the progression, it wasn't something that, you know, it's not going to rock your socks. You can see in the top left corner there, those 4 white, I guess they're hexagons, whatever those are. When you attack, when you deal damage to something, you get a mana chunk back, and then you can spend that on shooting your bow or using whatever abilities you get later on. And so it's more like you're not collecting mana potions or using consumables. You just need to hit stuff. And there's stuff scattered about the world, but there's little mushrooms and ice chunks that if you really need to get mana back for a puzzle you're solving, you can go whack it and those grow back. So again, it's like they got kind of the basics there and didn't try to overdo it with how they worked. They just made them feel really good and then focused on the world, the ambiance, and how the character played. And it feels like, and I honestly wish a lot more games were mindful of their budget and also the length of the game and the kind of game they're making, right? This feels like it is just right, or maybe even above where you'd expect a 2-man team to make for an RPG that's only about 8 hours, right? Everything is just enough to satisfy, okay, I have progression, I have weapon choices, I have the ability to have combat, there's enough enemies to keep me interested, but they didn't overshoot and make a scope that was so big that they under-delivered in every area. So I think this is a great example that smaller teams can use as finding the right balance between the scope you set versus the resources you actually have to utilize. So this is a team that I think they nailed it. It's awesome. Obviously, this isn't their first game, and maybe they had some help outside, but overall, that's not something that's easy to get right. And you see this all the time with games where they overreach, they include too many features or too long of a story, or the detail is too much and they can't deliver on it. It's out of scope for them, and then they end up kind of detracting from your experience in the game, or even just ruining your experience because they just couldn't give you what they were trying to give you. So I think this is a very good balance between all that for a really good game that just kind of is what it is. The OST in this game is awesome. The scoring, I believe, I don't know who did the OST, but it's really, really good. You don't sometimes you get that right with the smaller projects, you get a really good kind of charming OST. But I think this one was it harkens back to a lot of the old RPGs with subtle notes, but it is modernized. I think it's mixed really well. The main theme is very catchy. It's been stuck in my head for weeks. And I think the boss battle themes were really cool too. So the music nailed it. The audio design was good too. And everything worked well with the like combat effects. And again, it just kind of is exactly what it's supposed to be for the game that it is. It had a good variety of encounters as well. This is also another hard thing to do, is finding a way to reuse assets like mob types that in a way that makes the player not feel like they're just killing the same thing over and over. Like if I compare recent playthroughs like Scarlet Nexus to Death's Door, I think Death's Door did it a lot better, where you are fighting similar enemies, but in different environments with different restrictions and with different mixtures of enemies that made it feel like it wasn't all that samey. And you also end up kind of finding new enough puzzles and when you get new abilities and weapons, you can then fight those things in different ways that made it feel fresh and interesting. So I think that it was just enough. Obviously, you would always want more as far as content and gameplay goes, but in that level, it worked out perfectly. There were a few puzzles in the game that were that stumped me a little bit. It doesn't feel like the kind of puzzles that are a little patronizing. I think they felt really good. They were rewarding to get right. It had that kind of Metroidvania style of puzzles where you encounter an obstacle that you physically cannot accomplish until you find a new ability, right? For some reason, you need a double jump or whatever else to come back and do it again. And there's things that are very clearly marked. You'll find anchors or specific spots that you obviously can use something on, you just don't currently have it. So they got a little bit of that Metroidvania feel in there, and it spiced it up enough where the areas felt unique. The boss fights were also pretty cool. One or two of them were a little simple, but the other ones were very good. And overall, cinematically, they felt like it was fit to the environment. It's one of those things where the boss fits you go to the boss's domain, so it's themed towards the boss. You fight the boss, and then it fits the area they're in, and then they have some really interesting mechanics that go with their name and style and aesthetic. So I think, yeah, another reason why I think they just nailed it. So if you like action RPGs, this kind of top-down combat, and you like having contained story experiences that have a start, a middle, and an end, Death's Door, I think, is a great purchase. I would recommend it 100% if this is something that just really fits your style. You'll find a lot of surprises in here. I think the world is charming. The gameplay feels good, and there's enough there that you'll kind of think about it and remember it for time to come. And it has enough replayability and endgame content where if you finish it and loved it, you'll have a little bit at the end, and you can replay it, later on when you forget things with a different style. So I think, it's awesome, man. Like it's worth the pickup. If you enjoyed yourself today, leave a like down below. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.